Hello, welcome to an online lesson on the economic impacts of globalization. For today's lesson, I have Mr. Clement Tan again. I don't think it's very special anymore because he keeps appearing.
I'm here too, bye-bye.
With Madam Narida, who is just supervising us to make sure that we don't fight. Okay, so without further ado, let's start with our lesson. So the main idea for today's lesson is that we will be able to understand the term globalization, and you should be able to write it out in your own words. In chapter 8, the previous chapter, you learn about the three drivers of globalization. For today's lesson, you'll be able to explain the positive and negative economic impacts of globalization along with the relevant examples. So, Mr. Clement Tan, what is globalization?
I think the first thing we need to know is that globalization is about how the world and the people become more interconnected. So very importantly, whenever we go for definition, please always use the words interconnectedness or increased interconnectedness or increased integration or increased interdependence. I think these are all very important keywords that we need to pay attention to when we always talk about globalization or when we explain it during our SRQ question number 7. Okay. So other than interdependence and interconnectedness, of course, for economic globalization, we are looking a little bit more on how it affects the countries and companies. Okay, and for social culture, of course, we're looking at how it affects the people. But for today's lesson, we are focusing more on the countries and how the different companies are affected for globalization.
Okay, so basically the main idea that we should be seeing in your SRQ answers is we need to see how globalization leads to rapid movement of people, goods and ideas or information. Okay, so economic globalization, essentially it means that the economic activities around the world have increased. So we see interconnection between economies of different countries is more intensified. We see that there's greater economic independence between countries. So it's caused by three driving forces. First is developments in transportation. Second is advancements in technology. And third is growth of MNCs.
I think we covered the three things during our drivers of globalization. So it's more of a recap for most of us here.
Correct. So when we talk about the economic impacts of globalization, there's basically three scales. So we see at a very national level, so Singapore itself, we see how it affects companies in Singapore, and also on the individual level, how are you affected by globalization? When you talk about impacts, it encompasses both negative and positive impacts.
So something just to take note of is that impacts, there is no good or bad. It's up to you to decide whether is it good or bad for the particular group of people. So just an example, say if you are a boss of a company, it may be good for you, right? Because you're able to get raw materials cheaper, but it may not be good for somebody else who may lose a job. So you really want to see how it affects certain groups of people. So that's very important, especially when we talk about some of these key terms. For example, tax revenue is where money that is earned by the government. So common tax revenue sources comes in from things like GST, goods and service tax. I think most of us know about it. Currently it's at 7%, but I know they are always say that they are looking at how it's going to rise very soon. Okay, there's also income tax, there's also corporate tax. Okay, the other thing we need to take note of is what is FDI. FDI basically is any investments from overseas made into Singapore-based companies. Okay, so that is FDI. FTA is very simple. Basically, it's a treaty between a group of countries so that when they trade with each other, it's a free trade area. So basically, there isn't any extra taxes so that I can sell my goods cheaper. I'm able to open up to a larger market. Okay, and last but not least, for investments, I think all of you know what investments is, so you'll just take a look at it.
Okay, so let's talk about economic impacts on countries. If you hear noise, it's because Mr. Clement Tan has chosen to choose now to eat his keropok. So the first economic impact on countries, let's talk about the positive impact. So the positive impact is how there's economic growth, because like what we're talking about just now, globalization has increased trading and expansion of business in different parts of the world. So the world is more interconnected. You can make business with other countries. You're not just limited to
your own market,
own market. So countries benefit from increased tax revenue and employment opportunities. So when there's more tax revenue earned, this means that the country has more money. The country can use this increase in money to improve infrastructure.
Okay, so I just give an example lah. Okay, I don't know whether you heard about this. Like Dyson, they actually not so recent, but they actually shifted their headquarters from London all the way to Singapore. So from that, once they shift everything over, what the government, local government do, what Singapore government will do is that they will tax based on, let's say, corporate income tax, corporate taxes, as well as your income taxes of these people that's working for Dyson. So they may be shifting from London all the way to Singapore. So when we tax these people, we have a larger pool of money. We can use it to attribute things like hospitals, roads, etc., etc. Okay, so these are just some examples we can take note of.
Yes, so when there's an increase in trade and business, this is good for the country also, because now this means there's a greater variety of goods and services for consumption, which will benefit us citizens also. So for example, Singapore, I think we all know that Singapore has very limited natural resource, right? We cannot produce our own materials or items as much because we don't have natural resources. So we rely a lot on import and export. Sorry, there's a typo there. It's not this, it's this. So we actually rely a lot on the global economy for expertise, products and services. So because we're a very small domestic market, right, this means that we really need to encourage foreign investments and we need to invest in other countries also so that we can continue remaining competitive and sustain our economic growth.
Okay, so two of these strategies where we can actually leverage on globalization is really through FDI and FTA. So in Singapore itself is really one of the top 10 cities in the whole world when it comes to FDI inflows, foreign direct investments. And people are interested to invest in Singapore for a variety of reasons. For example, Singapore has a very strong banking system. We have a very good communication infrastructure in the region. We are the gateway to Southeast Asia, which is the next largest exploding market in the world. So really we are quite so-called we're in a very good place, strategically speaking, that to actually leverage on the explosion of Southeast Asia. So so that is actually one thing we can look at, whereby companies are interested to invest in Singapore. So when they actually have this what we call FDI coming in, and eventually we do want to also set up FTAs. FTA stands for free trade areas, okay, whereby Singapore as well as its partners, in other words the ASEAN neighbours, they are able to actually trade. We already have that in place. We actually had the AFTA in place, ASEAN Free Trade Agreement or ASEAN Free Trade Area. So for companies that want to go into the region but still wants to have good infrastructure, good communication facilities, all these kind of things, Singapore is the ideal choice for them to use the FTA to sell their products to Southeast Asia, but they can base themselves in Singapore. So that's one thing that I think Singapore has an advantage in. Okay, the other FTA I think is very that we look at is a USS FTA. So USA Singapore Free Trade Area or Free Trade Agreement. So when countries negotiate for FTAs, generally they want to do it based on a win-win thing. That means it's not all things everything is supposed to go into FTA. If it's something that is good for you and it's good for me, it will go into the FTA, but not every single thing. So for example, like electronics, IT, chemical, petrochemicals, all these are a win-win thing for both countries. Therefore, it's included in this basket of goods and services that doesn't have to be taxed.
Okay, so in short, what's the positive economic impact on countries is that with globalization, there's an increase in trading and business ventures with foreign companies all around the world. So you see on the screen here is just like a flow chart of how there's more foreign companies setting out in Singapore. How does it actually impact Singapore positively? Okay, Mr. Tan, before you continue eating your keropok again, why don't you share a negative economic impact on countries?
I think it's a very standard thing to think about. Okay, say for example, if a local coffee shop owner, and if Starbucks comes into Singapore, and eventually Starbucks becomes the ideal choice of beverage to consume, so what impacts would they have on me? I'll probably think about closing down or shift to somewhere else and things like that. So one of the main problems when it comes to this idea of FTAs as well as FDIs coming into Singapore is things like the competition with our local made products. Okay, and with this greater competition, okay, it could lead to a price war and things like that. Okay, where local products can become a little bit little bit more expensive, okay, and as well as our expected idea is that when we bring in companies coming in, we're expected to actually learn from them and to gain skills and knowledge, okay. But however, you do realize that some of these companies, especially the management kind of portfolios, is actually left to foreigners to take charge of, and that becomes an issue because our locals are unable to gain expertise in this area. So there is no transfer of knowledge or very little transfer of knowledge, and that becomes a problem for us as well. And eventually, we're looking at how, if you look at this picture, really is about how FTAs could be a problem, especially when they displace local employment. Alright, so so this is something that we need to take note of.
I think at the same time, it's also the whole idea of economic downturn, because as much as it's a good thing when you're interconnected, it also means that the moment one country kind of enters the red zone where they have like an economic downturn, it will actually affect other countries as well. So I think in 2008 global financial crisis, it started in US and it really just escalated like a domino effect from there. So this led to decline in stock markets, global decline in demands for goods and services, which then later on decreased manufacturing output. So in general, you see after that as a whole global slowdown and increased unemployment worldwide.
Especially also because a lot of these US-based banks, which are affected, like Citibank or Standard Chartered, it can be found everywhere else in the world. So if these banks are affected, it will affect every single country that has these banking operations. They may want to downsize, and then when they downsize, they may want to cut local employment, and this will have a domino effect on everybody.
So what are the measures to address negative impacts of globalization? So from the government side, the government actually puts in measures to help citizens, where they retrain workers to make sure that they're always relevant in a moving economy. Low-income families are given rental rebates to ensure they have shelter or whatever form of financial help that they need. For businesses, they will help to introduce policies to actually help local businesses, like reduce interest rates, increase tax exemptions, and things like that. So now you're talking about companies. Let's talk about the economic impacts on companies. In terms of positive impact, similarly, because we are so interconnected, this means that now companies can have access to new markets abroad, which means higher profits and higher market share. So for example, the company that will really enjoy this kind of benefit will be the MNCs, because they can get components from different parts of the countries and then assemble their final product in another country. So they can have different ways to actually lower down the cost of their production, which actually will enable them to earn more profit. For the local MNCs or local companies, the government will actually try to give them loans, grants, tax incentives so that they are able to expand into overseas markets.
Another thing I think the government is doing is also they will try to link up with the other countries' government officials to like smoothen the process for Singapore local companies to go into their country to do business. So these are some of the things that they do to actually make it easier for our Singapore local companies to actually go into MNCs.
But let's talk about the negative impact. So for example, Mr Clement Tan, since I see that you are hungry, if let's say you're craving for chicken burger, where would you buy it from? McDonald's, or would you just buy from like Tender Bears?
I think I will go for McDonald's, especially now they got the Korean jang chicken.
The jang chicken, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you realize that the negative economic impacts is that it actually leads to lower profits and market share, especially for the local companies or local shops due to increased competition. So the ones that will not exactly benefit from globalization is usually the local small and medium enterprises, because they always find it harder to reinvent and innovate themselves, not because they are lazier or they're not as creative, but because they don't have as much resources as compared to the MNCs. They have like maybe a smaller domestic market, shortage of expertise, labor, even funding itself. But it's not just limited to the small local companies. Even MNCs can face lowered profits and bankruptcy if they're not able to remain competitive. So once upon a time, we have this French hypermarket called Carrefour, or as locals say, Carrefour.
Yes.
But because they're not able to really compete with other companies, like maybe like cold storage or or other kinds of supermarket companies, right? So they ended up closing also.
I think got a few other examples also. I think like Robinsons.
Robinsons?
Yeah, I think they actually downscale quite a bit. I don't think we can find it. Do you still find them?
Robinsons, I guess like very small shopping malls like Causeway Point.
There used to be one flagship one at I think Gem or something.
Yeah, Robinsons used to be everywhere.
Yeah, but now it's like all downscale.
Yeah,
already.
that's true.
Yeah.
So what are the measures to address negative impacts of globalization on companies? So on some sense, the local companies will be like, okay, since I cannot expand overseas, right, then maybe I'll try to specialize in domestic market. So I try to make my products that is very much appealing or targeted towards what the locals want. Or at the same time, maybe if they cannot compete with the MNCs, then maybe they help the MNCs. So the MI Holdings, which is an SME, supplies hard drive disks for an MNC called Seagate Technology. The Singapore government also try to help by giving forms of assistance to help SMEs to try to expand overseas as well. So they have to facilitate partnership, give funding, any form of loan, grants or tax incentives. So one very classic example is actually Old Chang-Kee. So this is a Old Chang-Kee outlet in London. So you see on the screen how the government help is they provided them with opportunity to meet landlords and agents in London, help them to source for ingredients, provide grants. All this become like a base for them to tap on so that they're able to venture overseas.
Interesting idea. If I go London, I probably wouldn't go and visit the Old Chang-Kee.
That's true. But apparently Old Chang-Kee has also expanded to other countries as well. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the economic impacts on individuals. So on the individual level, if you benefit from globalization, you have higher income because now you can literally work everywhere. It's easy to work overseas. So for example, if I find like a good job opportunity in London, I'll be like, bye Mr Clement Tan, I'm going off.
Bye.
I'm earning more money there.
That's what you think.
Stop.
Okay, yeah.
I can actually benefit. Who knows I can actually benefit because I have global skills that make me employable by overseas companies.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I think this term is something that is quite not something that is very difficult. I think it's quite familiar to us. It is actually called brain drain. Brain drain basically means that with increased globalization, the amount of people that, because the mobility of manpower is so fluid. Like anytime like Miss Rose wants to go to work in London, anytime she can just shift over. There isn't like she apply for work visa, she can work there for like years. I don't know how long. Yeah. So because of the mobility of manpower, we are able to actually shift people around. It makes it so much so that certain countries that are seen to be a better place to work for certain industries, people will all flock over there to work. Give you an example is the Silicon Valley. I don't know whether you heard of this before. If you are looking at doing tech related jobs, I think some of the biggest companies can work for like Apple, even like Meta, Netflix and things like that. They are all based in this in US. It's called Silicon Valley, right? So if you really want to go and get a very good a job that is high paying as well as you have a lot of progression, maybe that's the place you want to head towards. But if more and more people go towards there, go there to work, you realize that Singapore, we are going to lose all our brilliant our brilliant programmers and coders and all that. So we will suffer from what we call brain drain, where all our talents will be drained to another country. But if you think of it another way, right, in Southeast Asia, Singapore is seen to be the ideal destination. So we are also draining the brains from other countries in the region. So it's always a better prospect will drain from us, then we will drain from our other competitors as well. So it's always like that, yeah.
So I think like another example here that you can see is how Uniqlo shifted production to Southeast Asia from China. So in this case here, right, who do you think will benefit? You don't realize that everyone can hear you eating your cookie, right?
The Teddy chocolate biscuits. It's actually quite nice.
So Mr. Clement Tan, who benefits in this case study here?
I would guess the Southeast Asia. Yeah,
the workers in Southeast Asia, yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Uniqlo themselves.
Yeah, Uniqlo is because of our lower cost of production. Maybe the countries in Southeast Asia, because you have now higher employment opportunities, right? And as well as even the Chinese companies, right? Because they're able to then sell to maybe Vietnamese market or whichever, yeah. Right? So all these things, I think there's a lot of gains elsewhere.
So who loses out then?
who loses out? Maybe the workers that used to work in China for Uniqlo. Yeah, so they will lose out. Maybe the locals as well. Maybe the local Vietnamese clothing.
Oh yes.
Yeah, the people who do clothes there, they may find that people are buying Uniqlo a bit more. So there's always winners and losers for globalization. It's only how we shift our skill sets to become the winners in this globalization game.
So talking about Mr. Clement Tan was talking about loss of income, right, just now. So similarly, I think workers will be affected by increased competition because they either have to be okay with the idea of having lower income, or they can actually lose their job. So for example, like the people in China, if they used to be working in the Uniqlo factories, they realize that they will lose their jobs because now the factories have been shifted to Vietnam. Yeah, so this is like what I was talking about just now also. So there's a whole idea of loss of income. If let's say you're among a group of people who's not really able to benefit from the whole positive impacts of globalization.
I think one more thing to take note of is also how adaptable the workforce is. Some things are quite easily, I can change quite easily. For example, if I want to go to a manufacturer, I think that's quite simple because it's a repetitive job. But let's say if I'm a factory worker, I want to suddenly become a programmer, or that will take many years.
Yeah.
So sometimes the speed of change could also be a reason why people lose jobs temporarily when they are undergoing this transition.
And unfortunately also when it comes to companies changing or maybe innovating, the lower skilled workers, because their skills are a bit more specialized to like a certain skill, they find themselves being more easily replaced if let's say their skills no longer value add to companies, or if let's say their skill can be replaced by like a machine that is faster, that is more efficient. So more skilled workers can also be replaced by maybe cheaper and equally more qualified labor from foreign countries. So these are all different situations in which you can actually lose your income because of globalization. So what are the measures that were actually taken to address the negative impacts of globalization on individuals is, so the Ministry of Manpower actually came up with like different programs to actually continue training Singaporeans to remain employable. So for example, on the screen here are just some programs that the Ministry of Manpower, the government has come up with to actually retrain workers to keep up with the changing economy.
I think one group that is going to be quite affected is really the elderly or people above a certain age that finds it a little bit harder to switch skill sets, especially when their skill sets become obsolete because of innovation when it comes to machinery or maybe AI coming in. Like for example, accountants in future, I don't know, with AI coming in, you may just lose their jobs because I don't need accountants anymore. I can just do it on a program.
So you realize there's actually a lot of courses that adults can take, like work skills qualifications, part-time diploma, different kinds of diploma actually. So it's just because you graduate from school doesn't mean like the learning just stops there. Lifelong learning.
Yeah, and a lot of it is actually subsidized and is like it's a good price to actually get. So my wife is actually taking a course on something about how to teach Chinese language. Yeah, something like that. So I think she's interested in that area. So she signed up and a lot of the course fees is being subsidized by the Skills Future. So it's quite a good thing.
I think they're trying to get more people to learn how to translate. So I keep seeing like advertisements about it where they will like subsidize people who take, I think, diploma or some cert in translation also. It's pretty interesting, yeah.
What would they translate for?
Chinese to English lah.
Or something.
Or Malay to English lah. What else can you translate, right?
I don't know how many languages do you need to take to get this thing?
I mean, you can specialize in something, right?
I don't know.
You apply see what happens.
Okay.
Okay, so we've just finished fighting.
Okay, I think we are we done with this?
Okay, we are done with this part of the lesson. See you in the next part of the impact of globalization.
Yeah, impact of globalization. Okay, bye-bye.